This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. For all my Texas friends recovering from the primary election last week, I hope you're catching up on sleep and enjoying some outside time that doesn't involve canvassing or waving signs. The weather's been great this last week, and it's always nice to have those days after a campaign's over. We had the country's first primary election this year, and it was absolutely nuts. Lots of competitive seats, and we've got a bunch of runoff elections coming in May. So all that to say, the fight continues for a lot of folks, but at least some of you guys are getting some sleep. Today we're talking with Chris Perkins, a nationally renowned pollster of Ragnar Research, and we'll be spending time looking at the lessons from the Texas primary, what we know about the national landscape for the general election, and critical things you need to know about polling in your campaign. Win or lose, I hope you left everything on the field to know you did everything you could. The only thing that sucks worse than losing is knowing that a bit more work could have made that difference. That's what I learned on my first campaign, and it was awful. Whether you win or lose, make sure you take the time to complete a rigorous postmortem on the campaign. That's really the only way you're going to fully understand what your strong and weak points were, what helped you win or made you lose. Few campaigns put enough focus on this since everybody's tired and either excited or crestfallen based on the results of the campaign. The lessons you learn will be of incredible help down the line, so make sure you take the time to learn them. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast and given us a review, please do so. It's a huge help in attracting new listeners, and it always gives me a nice fuzzy feeling as well. And don't hesitate to give us or our guests a shout. One of our listeners in Australia actually reached out to the Campaign Sidekick team last week, and it's always cool connecting with folks and hearing what you're doing on the campaigns. Now, as far as this week's episode goes, Chris Perkins is an expert in quantitative and qualitative analysis, having conducted and analyzed survey data for over a decade on behalf of Republican candidates. Perkins is considered one of the top public opinion experts in the United States and has been cited as among the most accurate pollsters in the country. In the 2010 to 2016 election cycles, Perkins polled for nearly 100 winning Republican candidates from state legislative to statewide office, and he's conducted public opinion research in over half the states in the union while building a fantastic reputation. Now, I've known Chris for about 8 years since we were both working early on in the Ted Cruz orbit, and he continues to provide great results for campaigns and is building a wonderful reputation here in Texas and far beyond. So let's get to the interview. I think you guys are going to like this. Chris, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you today.
Thank you, Raz. Appreciate you having me on.
You know, we've known each other for a number of years. First got connected, I think, back when Ted Cruz was first running for the Senate here back in 2011, 2012. We started running across each other's paths, and your history of work product, doing awesome work nationally, internationally, and a lot here in Texas is really incredible. So I'm stoked to get to talk today about your background. We just had the Texas primary. This will be coming out about a week after the primary, and so we have a couple days to digest that. Looking forward to the November election, and then get a lot of advice for our listeners about polling, how they can use it, and what they should be looking for. So I'm really excited about what folks are going to learn today.
Yes, thanks a bunch. I appreciate you having me, Raz. It's a fun time. I know our political consultants are trying to figure out ways to get some extra sleep nowadays, since most of us had some very, very early mornings and very late nights for at least the past 4 weeks for sure. So, but yeah, on to the general. Here we come.
Yeah, I think you and I and a bunch of other folks around the state, especially, are kind of hardwired into this really weird sleep schedule that kind of seems like insomnia a lot of the times. Now that we don't have to be up, we still can't hardly go to sleep.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's the plus side. Anybody that is interested in polling, you have. I don't know that I got to bed before like 3:30 a.m. was about my average bedtime. Being in the field nightly. Yeah. So. Yeah, anybody, if you're good at looking at numbers and data at really awkward hours in the night, you'll be just fine.
That's key in the job description for anybody working in polling and surveys.
Right.
Oh,
That's
man.
Right.
Well, let's start out. Tell us a little more about your background, kind of where you got started in politics, and the story of how you got to heading up Ragnar Research.
Sure. Yeah. There's a few different ways, to get into the polling aspect, which is really, data analysis, and looking for trends and understanding what a number means, not just what a number says. There's two basic ways. Well, for number one, it's also one of those things. There's not a lot of us nationally. I mean, there's a decent amount, but there's a lot more general consultants or television ad creators or digital type of vendors, mail firms. There's a lot more of the voter contact side, and part of it is, polling can be very granular, very, there's just a lot that goes into it. So, I think there is the data piece and understanding the analysis, which most of the consultants totally understand, but I think there's more in our industry that wouldn't be more on the direct voter contact side. But there's, it's also one of those things. There is no voter contact. There is no message until you get the polling to understand what is actually going to drive the electorate.
And you're talking about number of vendors in those relative spaces, right?
Sure. Yeah. A lot more people that do mail or television or run races, digital. I mean, all of those things are very important aspects of the campaign, but just from a volume standpoint, there's just a lot more of them than the polling side.
Yeah.
So it kind of takes a unique mindset to really just feel like they actually want to do kind of the survey research / polling side of things, which is interesting. So, that generally when you talk to a pollster, there's typically two people that get into it. There's two ways. One is through the educational background. There is a lot of people in the field that have a master's or advanced degree in statistics, and that's very necessary. I mean, I've got one on board with my team. And then the other side is the way I took it. It's kind of what we call the campaign's trial and error piece. I mean,
right.
That's another way to do it. You see it and are involved in it so much that it just becomes something that you get used to and you can pick up and start doing. My general background is there was in college. Basically there was one semester I took off, but in summers I would go work campaigns. So this is as I'm on the old side. This is of course in the 90s. So there was a couple of times there was volunteer times, and then there was actually a time frame in the summer where I took a summer campaign job and just came home on weekends to Houston, which is to run a campaign, not to run, but just be a member of the campaign. That was when I was 19. And so we did campaigns then. Then, there was one particular after my sophomore year of college. I went to Washington, D.C. To be an intern for the Leadership Institute. And then up there, I got to know some of the people, just some more of the political people, and they were interested in bringing me on to potentially be a number two, a deputy campaign manager. I'm 22 years old at the time, 21, 22 years old at the time, in a congressional race, and I was interested and didn't conflict with my college and baseball schedule, so I took a semester off to go to California and to be the number two on a congressional race out there. So I think I was 21, 22. I can't even remember. Whatever it was, 1998. At the time to go out to California and get involved in just one. Basically, it was taking one semester off to go get involved in a congressional campaign that was a top target. Very very heated race, very competitive. 1998 was also seen as the destruction of the Republican Party of California, so we lost and lost basically everything in the state. So then moved forward from there and got involved right. I mean, it was the day I had a campaign manager gig lined up back in California again for a state assembly race. And I had it lined up before I graduated, and the day after I graduated, I was on a plane to San Diego.
Nice.
Managed the guy's race, and we won by a single point. So it was
wow.
It was the first race I ever won. It was and I managed the race. And as much as I got to admit, as much as I loved the scenery and the weather of Southern California, I knew I didn't want to stay out there. So we won, and then I came back to Texas and got a job managing the race of this rather famous, infamous guy named Tom DeLay, who at the time was the House Majority Whip. So I managed his race down in Houston, which wasn't really much of a race. We won 68%. So it was never in doubt that we were going to win that. But I started working with Mr. DeLay, who was the Majority Whip at the time, moved to Washington, D.C. right after the election of 2000, which was also coincided with George W.'s victory against Al Gore that was decided not on election night with Florida recounts and all that. But moved to D.C. directly afterwards and started working for DeLay for his Federal Political Action Committee. Did advance work for him, but then ultimately moved into the role of director, in which I was responsible for all of the federal kind of political stuff that went on, as far as anything that had to do with campaign-related activities for House members, House challengers. So I got to know basically the national political scene very well from a district-by-district perspective. Where were the races that we needed to be targeting? Where are resources going to be diverged to be able to grow the Republican majority in Washington? And just a few years later, there was this rather infamous situation in Austin called the 2003 Texas redistricting situation, which was, depending on the perspective of what side of the aisle you're on. The Democrats hated it, fled the state, et cetera, et cetera. But what I actually was involved in was actually doing the map drawing. So in my role of working for Mr. DeLay, who had ascended to majority leader at the time, is being in Austin, involved in the legislative process, just as somebody who is, assisting, drawing the map and basically not drawing the map officially, but drawing the map that the delegation wanted, and then help making sure that we could get the votes that we needed to pass ultimately a redistricting plan, which was successful, and we picked up, I believe, 7 seats that cycle, and ended up being kind of 8 seats long term. And I will admit that was the process that actually started getting me. Didn't know it at the time, but ultimately that was the process that kind of led me to realize I would be good at basically doing some of the data work, because anybody that's been involved in redistricting, it's one of those things where I'm really happy to have done it once, but I will never do it again.
Right. That's the common theme I hear from most people that do redistricting work.
That's right. It was the greatest experience of my life, especially from what I do today, but it's not something I would ever do again.
Right.
It was a valuable lesson and means for doing it once, but it is incredibly difficult work. It is months of very late hours. It is incredibly, when I say granular, you're talking about tedious pieces of data that you've got to put together. On the congressional end, it's actually a little bit harder than the state end, because you have every single district in the state has to be within one person of each other. I mean, literally a person. So every single congressional district has to be identical size, versus the state. There's some county line rules, and you don't have to be. You can. I think there's a 5% give or take. I don't remember what the exact rules are, but at the congressional end, it's incredibly difficult, because you're building districts to make sure that you are gaining a political advantage, in this case over the Democrats, all while protecting communities of interest as much as you can, members' interest, state legislators' interest, and making sure that you're in full compliance with the Voting Rights Act as well. So all of those things go into putting together. At the time it was only 32 districts. It's now 36. Those 32 districts at the time, and that's, it'd be different if we were drawing a district in, say, Wyoming. There's one. I mean, that's pretty simple.
Well, and you guys didn't have, back in 2003, there were, we think about all the data visualization tools we have now, and there are different websites you can go to kind of do some of this fun map drawing stuff, playing around.
That's right.
You didn't have much of any of that stuff at that point. It was a lot more Excel files and a lot of, really hardcore data crunching with little to no visualization.
Well, we did have some mapping software back then. It was just a lot slower. That was the problem. And the mapping software existed And so you did have the visual side of things, but I mean, we're talking now 15 years ago. While the visual side was there, it was just really slow. I mean, right now you can get it a lot. It's been so advanced. The technology, the mapping software is so much more advanced, where you can just do it a lot faster. I mean, I remember, when we would build districts, and basically once it was done, I'd basically have to run it, and it'd take, overnight, 8 to 12 hours before it would actually process.
Which is just insane.
I mean, less than 10 minutes. Yeah.
It's insane to think about waiting on a computer that long.
That's right. Yeah. Well, 15 years ago, that's what we were doing.
Yeah.
we have to wait overnight before we could actually see anything.
Well, and you mentioned the Democrats fleeing. That was a rather interesting tidbit of political history here in Texas. The Democrats literally left to go to Ardmore, Oklahoma, to break the quorum so that we couldn't pass that, right?
Yes, that's the House. The House Democrats ran to Ardmore, Oklahoma. The Senate Democrats ran to Albuquerque, New Mexico. That's right. The House Democrats were a little bit more famous because they held, press conferences and everything like that. It's kind of and I think they were there a little bit longer. The senators weren't in New Mexico, but just a couple of days. I vividly remember that one. Yep.
Gosh.
So yeah. Yep.
So moving forward from that, so you helped draw the maps for delay. What came next for you?
That's right. Yeah, next after that, I was with Mr. Delay 6-7 years. So right at around it was early in 2006 where I went over to the RNC to run the Independent Expenditure Unit. So for those that don't know the situation with federal law, at the federal end, you can spend unlimited money as long as it is not coordinated. So each one of the national committees has the term is called the IE unit, or the Independent Expenditure Unit, where a division of, in this case, the RNC, works independently of the campaign, because that's the way the FEC sets up the rules. An independent expenditure can't be coordinated. So it's a completely separate piece of the committee that acts independently. It spends the committee's money that it allocates, but it acts independently of the actual committee on behalf of candidates. So I ran the Independent Expenditure Committee for a couple of cycles, in 06 and 08. Basically just in almost entirely Senate races. There were some House races, but there were Senate races too. And that's another step of where, I got to basically see just about every type of poll out there, and was really kind of the only person that really dug it. So, I mean, most people, it's we need to know what the top line is. We need to know what the best messaging is. And we need to know, generally who to target. That is where I really started, really enjoying the side of being involved in the survey process and getting a good understanding of best practices, who does what well here and who does what well there, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where I really started getting involved on the polling side of things. More, even though I wasn't conducting it, I knew that would be a place that would be somewhere I would want to be, at least kind of on the vendor side of things. So when it comes to being a vendor / consultant, that was the part that I enjoyed most of all. That and beating Democrats. So, yeah.
And the two go well together.
Well, that's exactly right. Yep.
And moving forward from there, you got, in about 2010 is when you started doing the consulting and the polling on your own, right? Or you started moving out to doing it as a vendor. And since then, you've worked for over 100 winning campaigns from everywhere from state legislature up to statewide and gubernatorial Senate, that kind of thing, across the country and even internationally, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's right. I guess I've we'll say officially been a pollster for, oh man, I can't even believe I'm saying it's eight years. I guess it's 8 years now. It's time flies.
It does.
For quite some time. It's been great. It's an interesting thing how the polling community has evolved. One of the things that used to be the standard was, when you're doing a messaging piece, when you need to understand what messages to feed to voters, you just essentially score them. You basically just ask, what's the most important issue? And you line it up, and whatever comes out first that's what you do. Well, I mean, there was a time frame, especially in 06 and 08, when Republicans weren't doing so well, that polling, the scoring-based polling was essentially showing you, here's the best message, but we would run on these messages and we would ultimately lose. And that's part of the piece of the human behavior sciences that we're missing from polling. I mean, this is, maybe they state that this is their most important issue, but it's not influencing how that they're going to react at the ballot box. So that's where my firm is taking it kind of to a next step and doing a very rigorous messaging analysis to really understand what is going to drive voters, what is going to influence human behavior, what is it that we can say from the candidate's perspective that's going to move a vote or influence a vote. That's more important. I mean, it's important to know what's on voters' minds from their perspective to understand what the issue is, but it's more important when we're actually going to be driving a message is how are you going to you're going to influence or you're going to change potentially, depending if you're down, human behavior at the actual ballot box. And then there's another thing the other thing that happened, he can go back to the Mitt Romney election where it was essentially a scenario of, we don't need to do cell phone only households. It costs too much. We can weight the data. I was on very much on the other side of that. That's a flaw that the more senior pollsters had basically said, you don't need to do it. And then, of course, after the election, when most of the pollsters were wrong, it was like, well, hey, we should start doing cell phones now. Well, duh. I've been saying that for a while.
Right.
So yeah, now it's become basically industry standard. Being that the fact that cell phone only households on the rise. I mean, if you do not have cell phones in your sample, if you are doing IVR or robo polling, you are missing 50% or more of the election. So when you're doing that, so yeah, man, that was another kind of industry change. It was, it was something that totally didn't need to be done back in, what year was it, 2012, and now fast forward to 2018, just a short 6 years, and it's a standard. It has to be done. If you're doing accurate representative polling, you've got to include cell phones in the sample, which was not something that happened just 3 cycles ago. So yeah.
Well, I think that opens the door really nicely to talking about what we learned out of 16, because like I said, there have been dramatic changes, and I think if you ask most people today, what do you think about polling? What do you know about it? They're like, well, everybody got it wrong in 16, which you and I know to not be the truth, but a lot of people mess that up. What are some of the lessons that you learned and some areas where a lot of people got that wrong in 16? Why was that the popular understanding so far off?
Sure. Well, one of the things, I mean, it's interesting. The national committees actually did, put out the memos. They're not going to push the story, basically saying all of their internal polling was right. I mean, which it was. I mean, there was from a Republican polling standard last year, at least at the congressional, legislative, senatorial, gubernatorial level, there wasn't an issue. I can't speak for what the Trump campaign pollsters were actually saying, but we did not have any problems, not myself, not any other pollster, when we were dealing specifically with the races on the congressional, the senatorial, and the gubernatorial legislative end. There was not any polling problems. I think the narrative about the polls were wrong is a little bit overblown. And this is probably the first and last time I'll ever defend public polling. But if you go back and you look at some of the very late, whether it's, just pick your poll, whether it's Fox News or CNN or LA Times, it didn't really matter. But they had the race somewhere in the Hillary plus 3 to 6. All right, so the latest of the polling showed her winning nationally, which is a big deal, her somewhere between 3 to 6 points. Then those polls are going to have a margin of error about 4. Well, she did win the national vote.
Yeah.
She won the national vote by 2.5 points.
Mm-hmm.
So, when the narrative is, all of the polling was wrong, I don't know that they're talking specifically about the polling. Maybe they are, but I think it was more the political pundits, the prognosticators, that even though the polling was showing the race tightening, they were still essentially driving the narrative that Hillary was a shoo-in. I mean, it was the 538s of the world, and pick a political pundit from CNN, or just pick one. I mean, it was okay. Well, so we've seen the polls close. It's getting closer, but Hillary's going to win. It's going to win. It's going to win. She's going to win. She's going to win. She's going to win. And so I think that was another piece. It wasn't that the polling was wrong. It was the way the media reported the polling.
Yeah.
So, if a national survey, which is not how we elect presidents, we elect them by the electoral college, not national popular vote. But when a national survey says Hillary was up 3 and she wins by 2.5, that's not an inaccurate poll.
Yes.
Now, the knee-jerk reaction was for reporters to get out their stories at lightning speed was, okay, everybody said Hillary was going to win, but she lost, so the polling must be bad, so let's write a story on it. Well, after all the votes were counted, they weren't so necessarily wrong. And nobody's going to backtrack on it.
No.
The time it was just one of those things. It's probably one of the first and last times that you'll ever hear me defend public polling. But there were some public polls that were. That's right. There were some that were really bad. But the ones that you can go back and look at, Hillary plus 3 to 6, and that ended up being about what it was. But that's not how we elect presidents. And there was a void of polling in some of the key states that Trump won: Wisconsin, Michigan. Probably in Pennsylvania, there just wasn't an appetite for people to go into those states and do public polling. So, the way the media does a poll is they're going to do the cheapest possible thing.
Yeah.
So instead of doing a poll in all 50 states, they're going to just say, let's just do one nationally and just report off that. Remember, public polling is not designed to help a campaign. Public polling is designed for the media to report on a story. They want a story, so they're going to find the cheapest possible way to do it, and then execute that and just write whatever the results say. That's the big difference between public polling and then what we do. I would say 99.9% of my polls never see the light of day. The intent of my polling is not to release to the public for public consumption. These are for specific clients, whether they're political, whether they're corporate, trade association, nonprofit, etc. The idea there is we need a strategic way to get from A to B. We're at A, we need to get to B, and how do we do it? So it's a very rigorous approach into what we're doing versus, public polling is, hey, let's find the cheapest way to do it. Let's just dial out of a phone book and see what the results say.
So, surprise, they're
very
different.
Yeah, big time. Well, and I'll say real quick, the rule of thumb on polling is never make strategic decisions on polls you didn't pay for.
And talk a little bit about why that's the case.
Well, basically, remember, any poll that is released into the public, that is you see in the media or online, you don't have any control over how it was done, the questions that were asked, what is your target group? Your target group who you need to persuade, whether that's, independent women or a particular zip code or senior men, whatever the target group is not, you're not getting to look at that specific side. So if you're making strategic decisions, if you're basing your own campaign messaging and tactics off polling that shows up in the media, that is a big problem because you have no idea how it was done, who it was done to, and no say-so over the questions. When you make strategic decisions on the campaign about what messages to run on your candidate, what contrast to run on the opponent, how to build the narrative, whom to target, that's where we come into the equation, and we're part of the team in making sure we're assisting you. Here's your target group. Here's the proper message. Here's how to build the contrast. and here is how you execute it. This is exactly what you need to say to this group. Here is what you need to see to the larger body, and here's how you're going to move numbers. I mean, there is no strategic value at all by public polling. And private polling is always a lot. I mean, the methodology of the private polling is substantially better, too. Especially with us, we take a very rigorous approach to making sure that we are spot on accurate. The public polls don't care. They want a story. No.
Yeah, they're going for the public media is going for the cheapest option.
That's right.
Whereas you guys make your meal ticket off of being right and doing it well.
Bingo.
And so there's a huge difference.
Huge.
They need a story. You guys need to be able to give strategic insights to a specific campaign, help them move the needle to win.
That's right. That's exactly right. Exactly.
So let's look at the Texas primary election. There's been a ton of stuff reported in the media about blue wave, and I'm hoping by now people are seeing some of the differences. The fact that didn't turn out to be the case. Republicans still well outperform the Democrats, and in the primary as far as turnout and everything. But I think there's probably a lot of lessons you can talk to us about from what we learned through this primary on the statewide level, as well as any lessons down ballot.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, of course, we did see the early media stories about how the Democrats were overperforming the Republicans in the raw number of primary votes, et cetera, and those were the pre-Tuesday stories based on just early vote totals. Hey, look at how well the Dems are turning out people, blah 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 blah. And then on election, and then when all the votes were counted, it was actually the Republicans that outperformed the Democrats. I don't know that I have a really big take home over that, other than I would say there's a couple things. Number one, I don't think there's any doubt that the the Dems are gassed up. I mean, they don't like President Trump. There are other figures, whether that's in the state or nationally, they just really don't like. So the Democratic base is very gassed up. I mean, they're intense. So I don't think it's a surprise to see their voters turn out. But I just because there was an influx of voters into the primary on the Democrat side, I mean, one of the things that you'll note, you can see that the vast makeup of that was normal general election voters that decided to turn out in the primary this year. There's a couple ways to analyze that. Number one, these are November Democrat votes anyway, ones that Republicans had very little or no chance of gaining. And then number two, this is the first time in a while we've actually seen some competitive Democrat races in primaries. Yeah. I mean, you had two statewide, the U.S. Senate. You had some open congressionals. I mean, it was just by default or just organically, you were naturally going to have more Democrats turn out in their primary because they actually had some legitimate races this year in their own primaries, which typically they don't have. So I don't know that I'm putting a whole lot of stock into this situation to where the Democrats nearly outperform the Republicans. So this means something in a general. And I'll give you a quick example. I mean, we saw record turnout in the Republican primary 2 years ago. I mean, we've been kind of holding it somewhere between 1.3 to 1.5 million voters statewide. Had about that this year at 1.6. Well, last cycle, presidential year, we had 3 million voters come to the primary. And an abysmal turnout for the Democrats, yet the races were some of the closest we've ever seen statewide. I don't really know that you can say this, the primary turnout means something for the general. I do think that as Republicans, we need to be ready. We do see a gassed up electorate. We do see a Democrat electorate. We do see that they're intense and that they plan on, attempting to do everything they can to get our guys and gals out of office. And we got to be ready for it. I mean, I think we need to, heed the warning signs and not be complacent, run real campaigns, raise money, communicate with voters, and just not be complacent. I think that would be the warning is this is not DEFCON 4. We're still a Republican state, but we need to make sure and keep it that way. And the only thing that's going to not keep it that way is if we get lazy. And that's, I think that's the big piece of the primary is, you're dealing with a very intense Democrat base. they're going to come out. They're going to vote against our people, and we better be ready for them. And if we're not lazy and we do all the proper things in a campaign, I feel pretty good about it, even though we're going to have to work. We're going to have to work this year. So.
Yeah, when I see these kind of stories come out, I always kind of balance between wanting to basically prove that it's a bunch of BS or what they're saying, and not wanting to encourage people to be lazy, because you're right. That's the only, in the raw turnout numbers, part of why those stories were wrong was they were only looking at the top 10 urban counties in the state,
correct,
which of course have a Democrat advantage. When you looked at the final results, the Democrats did, back in 94 and 2002, they had similar turnout numbers in the primaries, near 1 million voters. They had just a little bit more this cycle.
Yeah.
But, we still had, about 500,000 more show up as far as primaries statewide.
Yeah.
Because we have 254 counties. If you're just sampling 10 urban ones, you're probably not going to get good results.
Yeah.
But your point is absolutely spot on. This is one of those things where, looking nationally, we got to make, the Republicans got to make sure that they hold on to every one of these House seats. Will Hurd's is up in the air. That's the only toss-up or kind of lean toss-up that I know of here in the state. But we have 5 open seats where we're going to have brand new Republicans that haven't run on a federal level before that are up there on the ballot in November. And that's, that always changes the dynamics when you're talking about a non-incumbent running in those seats. They got to build their own name ID. They got to run. They'll be running under a good statewide ballot, but it's still, there's no givens in politics.
You're exactly right. And look, that's the opportunity. If you're looking at this, Texas is part of the equation, but if you're looking specifically nationally, I mean, anytime there's a quote unquote wave year, whether that's a Republican or Democrat, I mean, that's kind of an overused term. But the place that on the Republican side, when we were looking for opportunities, you had your obvious ones nationally. You had the ones that were, the obvious ones that were single-digit races where, you want to recruit a good challenger. But our opportunities were always in the open seats. And that was where, even if it is a Dem-leaning seat, that's and the the prognosticator said, so-and-so incumbent Democrats retiring, but it'll stay in Democrat hands because it's a Democratic-leaning seat. Well, guess what? We would make sure and be competitive in those so-called Dem-leaning seats and be able to win them because we went in and got aggressive and they got a little complacent. Because, it's like, nothing to see here. Well, guess what? We went in there and took them. So, yeah, I mean, that's a situation that we as Republicans need to be very aware of. I mean, we're already starting to see it. The narrative is, all these seats are safe. Well, technically that's true, and the numbers say it is. But when it's an open seat, the voters don't know who the Republican is or who the Democrat is, for that matter. So it opens the door to allow somebody, on this case, the Democrats, to come in. So this is their shot. I mean, it really is. I mean, they've got how many open seats? They've got 6, I believe, is what it is. That they on the congressional end that they could potentially go pick off. This is something that the Democrats have been waiting for a long time. This is their opportunity, and that's where I think it's as long as we're not complacent and we're doing the right things and we're running good candidates and raising money and driving a message. And not getting lazy, I feel good about our change. I mean, we've got a long ways to go. It's March, long ways to go, but that's good. That's actually, I would say, because it's March, one of the benefits about getting primaries out of the way early. I mean, it's one of those things where primaries are just kind of a fact of life. People get nasty. It's primaries. Put friends against friends. And that's always the unfortunate situation with primaries. But I think one of the plus sides for Texas is we've always done a good job of coming together. I mean, there are factions within the Republican Party, and primaries do get dirty and nasty and friends versus friends. And, they can make for some uncomfortable situations. But the very big plus for us about having our primary so early is we've always done a really good job of healing and coming together in the general. There is a lot of states where that just doesn't happen. I mean, Kansas, Arizona, Florida, their primaries are, in September, and, they've basically got to get out of the primary, then run a 6-week general, and you still got hurt feelings and all the things that go into kind of the inside baseball primary side that really weakens the candidate for the general. I think It's two things. First of all, it's in our Texas nature to come together eventually. And second of all, I think timing helps. I mean, I think the fact that we have a primary so early, whatever hurt feelings exist in the primary, we've always done a really good job of coming together and kind of muscling up for the general, which is a big benefit for us. It's a benefit for us nice Texans personally too. Yeah.
That's right. We can have time to lick our wounds and sing Kumbaya and get all together, and it's definitely very helpful.
Yeah, no doubt.
That kind of is a great segue into looking at the November stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the difference of 6 months from now to the November can make. Well, we've seen a big shift that's concerning in the last 6 months. Looking back at generic congressional ballot and a lot of the states are in play,
mm-hmm.
and we've moved from the Democrats to take back the House. I think it's like 24 seats they got a net
mm-hmm.
in November, and we've gone from about 22 or so being theoretically in play back in August to now we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 36 that are considered in play,
mm-hmm.
And that's pretty concerning given given what we got to do to keep the House. The Democrats' opportunity is really, because on a nationwide basis they're really jazzed because they're running a lot of candidates and they have a wide primary field. They're challenging us on a pretty wide front. Talk a little bit about what it looks like for the House and what these campaigns need to be looking at as they're moving forward.
Sure. Yeah. And I will admit I am concerned. I'm not in bunker mentality, basically saying the sky is falling, but I am concerned. The concern being two specific things. Yes, we're underwater on the generic ballots. I think I saw one this morning where we're minus 10. The same poll had us at minus 2, 60 days ago. So that is a concern. The other concerning aspect is the special elections. And I'm not so much looking at the big ones, the ones that were covered nationally, like Alabama and Georgia. I'm more focused on a lot of these smaller legislative races, Tennessee, Washington, New York. There's been a fair number, Wisconsin. There's been a fair number of not really nationally discussed legislative races in which we were losing these races. Now, it's a special election, so you're dealing with a confined turnout. Turnout in special elections are very easy to manipulate, but this tells me that, again, this is a very aggressive, very active Democrat voter side. They are coming, and we need to be prepared. And I worry, I can't speak for any of these campaigns specifically because I wasn't involved in all of them, but I do worry about kind of the complacency on our side. This district's plus 10. We're good. Oh, oops, on a special election, we lost it. And then the hand-wringing Monday morning quarterbacking is all about, this is the turnout. Well, damn it, why didn't we turn out our people? I mean, if we knew this was coming, let's get ready. So there isn't – I'm not taking the special elections to say this is some national trend, but there is some legitimacy to this. I mean, the fact that we're losing down-ballot red seats – is a bigger picture concern. This is a concern. Now, this is correctable. This is one of those things where it is correctable. It's March. I mean, we're 8 months from the election. I mean, 8 months of politics is an eternity. Things shift fast. It is nationally. It could get worse. It could get better, and that is where it's up to us to drive a better story. I mean, I don't know that I don't know that we have anything to do with like the national Republican brand, but I think that's going to be part of the equation. But the onus is going to be on the individual candidates, the individual members, to basically push their story. I mean, each one of these people have won before. We don't have to go back to the well, but tactically we need to understand how we're going to navigate this. So I admit I'm concerned. I'm not saying the sky is falling, but there is a concern, as of, what is today, March 9th? As of March 9th, I'm concerned. But then again, we've seen shifts before. And I think, a lot of this is going to be driven from the federal end, and we'll see what, issues we can run on. There's been some good, there's been some bad. At the national side, we really started off on the wrong foot by not being able to fix Obamacare. That really hurt us early. It kind of came back where we passed the tax cuts. that's been that continues to trend up in the polls. But we still have that healthcare thing kind of hanging out that, eventually we're going to probably need to address. So there's been some good and there's been some bad. We are underwater, but again, that's where the onus is on us to not be complacent, not say, hey, I'm on plus 10 district, we're good. We've got to be, aggressively raising money and ready to start driving the message when necessary.
Well, and on the flip side, the nice thing is where there's a lot of worry on the House side. I know, at least personally, I'm a lot more optimistic about holding the Senate, and that simply has to do with the map. They have the Democrats have so many more seats they got to defend. They need a net 2 seats, I believe. Is it 2 or 3 seats they got to net?
Yeah,
I think it's 3 seats, right?
Yeah, it's actually
right?
actually 2. It is 2 now. Yep,
that's right.
It is now 2.
They have a 1 seat.
We lost one in Alabama. Yep.
Yeah, it's like 51-49,
Yep.
So they need a net 2, and the map is really, and when you break down the map to what the competitive seats are, they have to hold everything,
right,
plus pick up both of the it's Arizona and Nevada, both the competitive ones, in order to do that, and that's just a really tough thing to do, especially when you look at the same class of senators that they've grown that class over the last couple times that it's run, and growing it again, it just we're in a good spot there. Like I said, we can't be complacent. Do you have kind of the same idea looking at the Senate maps?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the Senate map, it's a tough – the Dems are – it's kind of one of those things, if you're looking at it from the Democrat perspective, it's good and bad. The good is they've got a gassed-up electorate, and they are seeing trends going their way. The bad news is the map is just – they're on defense. So the Democrats are going to have to play at the Senate level, play a lot more defense this year, versus this would be the type of mood that would allow them as a party to go on offense. And look, because they're on defense, I mean, yes, they have opportunities in, say, Nevada and Arizona. But outside of that, it's a little bit more limited for them to play. I mean, you're talking about Tennessee and Texas becoming their next 2 opportunities. And I'll get back to that in a minute. But being the fact that they're having to defend so many seats, it's almost a good and bad thing for them. It's like it's the national mood is them on offense, but they're having to be on defense, and that's a problem for those incumbent senators because the Dems can go bash Trump all they want and talk about right-wing policies and class warfare and all the stuff they normally do. But these Dems are being obstructionists in the Senate. I mean, that is something that is going to be a difficult piece for them to navigate. I mean, what are we doing? We're just stopping everything from going through. We didn't get health care. We voted against the tax cut, but yet we are supposed to elect me. So, yeah, they have a national mood that would say offense, but in the Senate, they're on defense. And you're right. I mean, the map is a problem. Is it doable for them to win the Senate? Absolutely. But it's not quite as cut and dry as you think. I mean, that's an interesting balancing act that they're going to have to do is play offense and defense at the same time. I mean, you've got a lot of Dem senators that are going to have to answer for obstructionist votes. And while being on offense, that's interesting. Defense and offense at the same time. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we kind of got the flip side situation where it's good for us as far as the chance of us not losing it. But this is the type map where we would normally, with a different national attitude, it would be a hopeful time for us to pick up a bunch of seats and grow the majority.
That's right.
And because the national attitude, that's just not where we're at.
Well,
we're simply hoping to hold on.
That's the unfortunate side. There's the good news and bad news for us too. Right now, it's the absolute flip. I mean, for the Republicans on that side, it's. The bad news is we don't have a national issue that we can get behind anymore. I know we're trying, and we may get there. That's the hope. We don't have that anymore. We got a mood that's against us. But on the plus side is we got a lot of places we can go. We got a lot of places we can go and target and try and pin the obstructionist side directly on them. Yeah. So it's the total flip side for us on the Senate for sure. For sure. So,
well, you mentioned Texas. That's obviously a place that you and I know and love. You've worked for Senator Cruz. You know this race well. There's a lot of people talking about Beto and him being a Senate. Let's break down that race a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just speak at it from the O'Rourke standpoint. Let's flip the hat backwards and look. So it's he is to me. I don't know him. I would say he's an intriguing candidate. He potentially could be a real candidate, but there's a couple of problems. One, the fundraising. He's done a decent amount fundraising, but I'm hearing, I can't verify this, that he has a little bit of a high burn rate. That he's spending a little bit too fast than he's raising. That's never a good thing. I'm also starting to wonder the chink in the armor here, because one of the things, I even said earlier, we don't need to overanalyze the primary results, but he is essentially being courted nationally, and the guy lost 40% of Democrat primary voters. So, and what this brings me back to is this was the first chink in the armor that Wendy Davis showed. I mean, if you go back 2 years ago, Wendy Davis was a national hero, great candidate, is going to make Texas blue, all of the talking points, and we all know what happened there. It was an embarrassing loss. And the first time we saw a chink in the armor was in the Democrat primary. So, and maybe it was, who knows? Who knows what the internal situation is there? I don't pretend to know anything about Democrat politics, but this is a first sign of that he hasn't even consolidated the base. So he's already running in a red state. He already needs, he has a very narrow path to even begin with just by the numbers. One of those things would essentially suggest that a firm, solid Democrat base behind it would be necessary. He didn't have it. Now, I can show you the same side. We have our primaries early. We have a lot of time to heal. The Republicans have always been really good at it. Now we'll see if the Democrats are good at it, because they weren't 2 years ago. The problems of Wendy Davis continued. They continued. She was never able to have a firm base. And, if you don't have a firm base, that means you're not talking to independents. That means you're having to spend all of your time talking to the base when moving on to independents. Cruz does not have that problem. That is really good with the Republican base. We have no problem with Republicans. That allows Senator Cruz to be advocating a message more to the independent crowd. And that's a good thing when we already have a numbers advantage. So, from Beto's standpoint, I will admit he does have the ability to become a real candidate. He's nice looking guy, speaks pretty well, very folksy, but ultimately, tactically, he's already. The first thing we've seen out of him is he has a problem with the Democrat base. How many more problems can he have and expect to be real? I know I've been seeing his tweets about how awesome he's doing on fundraising, but if you're raising $6 million, but it's taking $5 million to get it, that's not really raising money. So I'm not looked through his report, so I don't know exactly. I may have just made that number up, but I'm also wondering how real this so-called fundraising situation is going. And to suggest that national Democrats will target Texas, I have a hard time believing. Having said that, Beto does have some potential to be real, and that's, again, we have to be ready for that. This is a situation, and when we're dealing with a national mood, we've got to make sure and make sure that we're doing our job, and we don't get complacent.
Yeah, there were a lot of similarities I saw as I was kind of looking back at those results to the Wendy Davis primary, as well as to the Ossoff Handel special election last year in Georgia, where they picked somebody that on a national level was very much something national Democrats love, but on a state level just wasn't quite getting the job done. Yeah, and because of how hard they ran to the national side, I think it turned off a lot of folks in state, both in the case of Ossoff and of Wendy Davis, and that's definitely. When you look at the primary results, Beto had to spend an enormous amount of money to stay out of a runoff against a couple people who basically spent nothing. I think one candidate literally spent like $700, the other spent $10,000, and he barely avoided a runoff there.
Yeah, you can't.
Like you said, that kind of gives scale to the problem he has.
You can't win a county commissioner seat with that kind of money, and they still took 40%.
No.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And again, we'll see. I mean, this is one of those things where I try not to dive too deep into the meaning of the Republican Party or the Democrat Party, primaries, because I mean, it is what it is. But I mean, I'm taking a wait and see approach with him. But I mean, he didn't start off real well. I mean, right out of the gate, he's been promoting how much money he's going to raise or has raised or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden, 40% of the Dems vote against the guy. That's not a good start. So.
No, but I mean, the good thing is, the Cruz team understands that there's the old adage: there's two ways to run a race. They're scared and unopposed, and so they're running a heavy race. They're taking the election seriously, and so it's gonna be interesting to see how this shapes up.
Yeah.
Let's skip on forward to talking more about Ragnar Research, what you guys do, what your rock stars at, and a little bit of information for our listeners about as they're looking at polling or hiring pollsters. Tell us a little bit more about all that.
Sure. I mean, I would say it's one of those things where we kind of, myself and my team over time is it's one of those things where we're known as the accurate ones. if you want to get the accurate information, come to Perkins, come to Ragnar. It's to go to that team. It's been sort of a situation for some time, and that's good. I mean, it's good to get paid to do what you're supposed to do. that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's sometimes a little bit unfortunate with the industry having some others having some problems, which is problems that myself and my team don't have. But I would actually believe that one of the things that I'm most proud of is just is our unique ability to understand and figure out how to develop the messaging sequence, how to build your narrative set, how to understand what it is you need to do, what it is you need to say to connect with voters. So I'm very proud of the very rigorous approach that we've taken to understanding and building the best means of message testing in the industry. I mean, it's, even though it's okay, you're going to get accurate data, part of that is how is it that you're going to be able to understand what to say? What is it, if you're down 20, what do you need to say to get you to parity? Or if you're up 10, what potential pitfalls could you be stepping into? So that's what I would say I'm the most proud of is the time spent on putting together and developing the absolute best means of message testing and message development in the business. So that is what I'm most proud of, for sure.
Well, and you've definitely built an incredible record of that. So as far as, a lot of our listeners, they're running campaigns, they're running as candidates, polling, you understand how important that is to test the message, to understanding where you're at. What are some of the things that they should be looking at as they're considering what polling they need and, more importantly, who they should have to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one is track record, which my team have, especially in the primaries, but now we're looking at generals. Number one is track record, and then number two, I mean, it's I would always just say who's going to put together the best messaging piece. I mean, ultimately, you want to know from your pollster, tell me what do I need? Tell me, give me the blueprint. You need to have a pollster on board that's going to draw you up the blueprint and where and be able to see things, not necessarily before they happen, but, not get caught up in, small data points or inside baseball. I mean, you want to be able to understand how the message progression is going to go and what voters to target. I mean, the question always I say to ask is, how are you going to tell me who to target? And, there is a difference between just tossing data out there and tossing numbers out there and saying, here are the numbers. But, there is a number if it's accurate, you still need to know how you're going to get to the finish line. So very rarely in polls do you see, a targeted race, be at 57%. I mean, you're at 48, 46, and if your pollster is just saying, hey, we're at 48, 46, well, what is it that we need to do to finish this? Where's the group that we need to target? What's the message that works with this group that we need to finish this off with? Is it a positive? Is it a contrast? What is it that we need to do, whether it's down the stretch or early, from a messaging standpoint, it's the idea of what's the blueprint. Tell me where I need to be going. Show me how to get from point A to point B. Point B being a win. How do we get there?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they think about polling, they're like, okay, well, I'm going to get somebody to come up with or just run these questions I've come up with, and then they're going to send me the crosstabs, and that's the work product.
Yep.
And that's one of those big differences between, sending it off to some IBR survey group where they can plug it in and make it dial and go into an actual survey and polling firm like you guys and what you guys do well, because you don't just come back and send the crosstabs and say, hey, adios, guys. You're a core part of the strategic team from A to B.
That's
you talked about.
That's exactly right. That is, you don't have to get gobbledygooky here, but we have to be able to run what's called regression analysis. Regression analysis is what testing the message. The crosstabs are very valuable because it allows you to know who to target, but the tabs aren't going to actually tell you what message to run. That's where my job gets, between the survey and between the analysis, is to be able to run the proper, what's called regression analysis, to be able to show you what messages are actually going to be working. So here is what it is. I mean, sometimes tab stated response can be a little deceiving from what we actually get off ballot. There's ballot movement and there's stated response, and I'm very much the one. Here is what's going to move the ballot. This may be what they like, but if they're not going to be influenced by this message at the ballot box, we need to find something that will influence them. So and that's where we're the best at what we do.
That's fantastic. Well, where can folks find out more about you and what you guys do at Ragnar and follow you online? You're big on Twitter and everywhere else. Tell folks where they can find you.
There you go, RagnarResearch.com. Pretty simple. Yeah. Ragnar Relays or Ragnar the Viking King. We'll take them both. Yeah.
Very good. Perfect. Well, we're going to have links to Twitter and your website and a couple articles about you guys, some of the great work you've done in the show notes. I hope folks will check that out and reach out if you got any questions or need some polling done. And Chris, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been great to talk about what's going ahead, what's gone behind us, and just the great work that you guys do.
Raz, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Really enjoyed it.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.